Okay, that puts us at just shade past 5 o'clock, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. But I want to say, thank you for those who have joined us in our MPOD alumni organizational development and change webinar series. Thank you. My name is Earl Airy. I'm one of the co-conveners of the MOD MPOD alumni group, and we thank you so much for being with us today. Today, our webinar is on reversing the tide of negativity in just 60 days using appreciative inquiry. That's just a testament to the powerful nature of when you have MPOD instruction and something incredible like appreciative inquiry using the 4D cycle. As just to refresh your memory, going through discovery, dreaming, development, and delivery. And with us today, who has done an amazing job in just 60 days of turning the tide of change, which a lot of people, of course, have some difficulties with. I mean, there's no constant but change does not have to be hard. So Cheryl Duvall from MPOD 1 is with us today. For the next 30 minutes, she is going to share the marvelous transformation that properly managed change can bring about in an organization using appreciative inquiry. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Earl. Appreciate it. Can you hear me okay?
You are coming in loud and clear.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be able to share my recent AI story with this community, and I look forward to our dialogue after my 30-minute presentation. I'm really trying to keep it to that so we have about 15 minutes to dialogue together because we have so much to learn from one another. But first, for those of you who don't know me, and I did have a couple questions. We'll show those at the end. I'm from MPOD 1, as Earl said, and I used my OD degree, and I still use it, to enhance my consulting services as a commercial interior designer. After many years of designing corporate headquarters and offices for corporations and public sector, I pursued my OD degree to educate me on how best to help building occupants embrace the changes that we were thrusting upon them. So I also wanted to work with companies to guide them in understanding how to use communications and policies and decision making to shape their internal culture and influence behaviors in the workplace. So in the dozen or so years since MPOD graduation, I've successfully linked my interior design background and experience with my OD passion. And sometimes my consulting services sit squarely in the workplace design sector, whereas other times they actually reside more in the OD field. But the story you are about to hear came about because of my reputation as an interior designer doing change management. But the change I was being asked to facilitate, had nothing to do with a physical work environment. So it clearly landed on the OD side of things, which is very interesting to me. Now, I don't always make that distinction, but once you hear the story, you'll see this really had nothing to do with the physical environment. And that's usually where I spend most of my OD time, on the physical side. So let's begin with the AI story with IFMA. So IFMA, if you don't know, the International Facility Management Association, is comprised of facility managers and businesses who support the operation and maintenance and of commercial real estate. And that means things like office buildings and hospitals and academic institutions. Pretty much any building that isn't a single family home. Their 24,000 members are spread across 100 countries with 134 active chapters and 16 councils. And when we say 16 councils, think of specialty sectors like hospitality and healthcare and academic and corporate. We also have, I am a member of them off and on, so I can say we. We also have 6 communities of practice. So facility management is really a relatively young profession that's very similar to OD, actually. In fact, I think they're younger than we are. IFMA was only founded in 1980, about the time that I started practicing interior design. I graduated with my 4-year degree in 1979. So IFMA has been always sort of in my arena. They hold several global conferences each year, including their largest, which is in the US every autumn, and that's called World Workplace, and it attracts more than 6,000 attendees across the world. So as I said, I've been a member of off and on of IFMA throughout the years, since many of their members are clients or prospective clients. And so I'm a member of one of their thriving communities called Workplace Evolutionaries. And a lot of the people who belong to that community are interior designers and architects and facility managers who are really trying to push the edge of office design. And so through that, I had been invited to present my change management process that I had developed since graduating MPOD, specifically related to workplace design. So I've been invited many times to present that. And so through the course of that, I met other members within the Workplace Evolutionaries group, including a woman, Diane, who actually just became a member of the IFMA board last year. And it was through her understanding of what I do on the workplace side of things that she thought of me as a change manager in general and recommended me to the incoming board chair of IFMA, Bill O'Neill, in July of 2017. So she introduced me as a potential change consultant and gave me a heads up that Bill might call, and he did just a couple of weeks into his term. And what she had described and what he had described is that there were several bold changes enacted by the global board and senior staff that had not been well received, and that's putting it nicely. The communications that they had delivered were were either lacking altogether or ineffective, and there was an extreme state of negativity, and across several stakeholder groups, especially the staff, where 1/3 of the 65 member staff had resigned in protest in the last year. They also had a category of membership called the Fellows, and that's another stakeholder group. That was IFMA's elite membership category, sort of considered gurus in facility management. And then the chapter leaders, like chapter presidents and others, administrators, who felt ignored and disenfranchised through these changes. And sometimes these three stakeholder groups would actually hold private group conversations with one another, griping and engaging in passive-aggressive activities directed to the board, including writing lengthy letters to them demanding action. So as he's describing all this to me and I'm listening to him, and he's asking what my recommendation would be to him as he's taking, his board position began in July, all I could think of was that we really should recommend AI here. And he kept saying, we're committed to getting this right. And I said, I really think that this would be something you should consider. He knew nothing about appreciative inquiry. So I shared a very brief PowerPoint deck with him overnight, literally, and then outlined a process to him. And I also said to him, you know what, we have an opportunity here, because I'm a member. I knew about the annual conference in the fall, World Workplace, so WWP, you might see that acronym as we go along here in the slides. And I said, I really think we have an opportunity. We could turn this around in 60 days. And he said, using appreciative inquiry. And he was interested in doing that and said, you really think so? And I said, I really think so, but it's going to be a lot of work and it's going to take a lot of commitment on all of our parts to do this. And he said, well, we're committed. The board is committed to seeing us do this. So he presented my proposal to the board and they approved it on August 11th. And this is what I had suggested. So we had a World Workplace Conference, coming up in October. It was 60 days really to engage all stakeholder groups. We would begin in Houston. That's where the headquarters resides for IFMA. It also happens to be where World Workplace was going to be by coincidence that particular year, so that last fall. We would start with an appreciative inquiry workshop for the staff and then do one for the fellows and the board representatives. So we were taking 2 of the 3 very hostile groups and engaging them in appreciative inquiry from the start. And I decided to make those 2 different workshops. Looking back, it was still a good decision, but I questioned myself when I did it, but we can all talk about that at the end. And then we wanted to develop some interview questions from both those workshops, combine them, and then conduct the AI interviews across stakeholder groups for a couple of weeks, and then convene a mid-September workshop with 17 representatives. We aimed for 20, we got 17 from 9 stakeholder groups to review the data that we had collected and develop aspirational statements. So that was my term. Instead of provocative propositions, which is sometimes what we call it, I use the term aspirational statements. And then I promised Bill that we would have so many great stories from this appreciative inquiry process that we could share those results and the aspirational statements at World Workplace, to the Global Board of Directors, as well as to the annual House of Delegates meeting. Now, that meeting the previous year I had not attended, but I had been told by people that it was not a good meeting. It was very negative, and they really wanted to see it turn around. Now, one thing that I need to share with you in that upper orange, and my chat field is covering it, so I'm going to look at my notes here. We did have one non-AI activity. Because there was so much turnover with the staff, I felt as though we needed to conduct one-on-one interviews with as many staff as we could. So they allowed me and my colleague to conduct one-on-one interviews that week that we were in Houston on either side of those 2 other workshops we were convening, and talk to people in leadership roles about what had happened, and ask them to be candid, and that their comments would be held confidentially with us, that we would not put their name on anything, but we would summarize all of the comments and report to the executive committee after. I didn't give a specific date, but somewhere in October, November timeframe. So we also wanted to open that up to the rest of the staff, not in leadership roles, to comment as well. And so they were able to participate in an online survey, staff survey, and they actually were, we got a huge response. We had an 84% response with the staff survey, and we allowed people who we interviewed one-on-one to also answer the survey. The same questions were there, so something that they might not feel comfortable telling a stranger face-to-face, perhaps they would be comfortable. So that's one thing we decided to do. It wasn't appreciative inquiry at all, but it was part of our overall consulting proposal. So it's just one piece that I want to mention, and we'll come back to that at the end. So that's the overall time frame and proposal that we presented, and they said yes. And then it was, oh my gosh, what have I done? I actually sold this process. I started thinking, can I really lead this? This is a lot to do in a short period of time. It had been 5 years since I had led a full AI process. I had attended and presented at the World AI Conference in April of 2012, but I hadn't made the last one. But I did make the MOD MPOD weekend, so I had talked to other AI peeps and felt like I was still remembering AI, but it really had been a while. I also needed help. My colleague could assist me, but he didn't know anything about appreciative inquiry other than just hearing me talk about it. So as I'm signing the contract with IFMA on August 11th, I'm really thinking, oh my gosh, we are really doing this. So we began planning a week-long kickoff in AI, to AI in Houston that would begin just 10 days later. So we flew to Houston on August 20th, just literally a couple hours after I finished my 6th triathlon. So my body was a little weary as I got into that plane seat and was there for a couple hours, but it was okay. So we all know the 4D phases, and Earl, also mentioned those. So I don't need to go into that in great detail to this audience, but I wanted you to see some of the dates and what we were trying to accomplish. So after this, it gets more image and intensive here. So I hope this is interesting to you. We started with the staff workshop. So we got there, we started our interviews of some of the senior leaders on August 21st. But the next day we did have a half-day staff workshop. They closed the office, literally shut down the phones, told everybody, all the members, that they were in a mandatory staff workshop. You can see that they're interviewing in pairs. And then they're debriefing with each other. They really got into this. It was very inspiring to see how dedicated the staff were. They were coming up with their topics and the questions. And at the same time, we're introducing them to appreciative inquiry. They know nothing about it. So I'm giving them little bits and pieces as we go throughout the day so they understand what they're doing and why they're doing it and where it's leading to and what's going to result from that. The following day, we invite the fellows and the board to participate as well. We had invited 6 fellows and 6 board members to attend this workshop. We could only get 3 board members to come. And that was a red flag to me, going, oh my goodness, maybe the fellows have really something to complain about here. So we got 6 fellows to drop everything they were doing and move mountains to come out with literally a week's notice. And here we are, only getting 3 board members to join. So we asked one of the staff members who usually deals with the fellows to join and also represent the board. She also deals with the board. So she was sort of an in-between person. So we had an even number of 10. We started this process with what we call milestone mapping, and we enabled them to use this as their icebreaker. I had put this big poster on the wall with the decades of IFMA from 1980s to now. Across the bottom, you can sort of see some images there of technological advances or big events that had happened, like 9/11, so that we could put it in context. And we asked each person to write down a significant milestone that IFMA had contributed to their life or to their career. And they would stand up and share just one, but then they would put all the other Post-its, up to 6 or 10 per person, on the milestone map. And this became a way of getting people to realize that they're all part of an organization. Maybe they had been negative and really butting heads, but this was a way to find common ground, and it worked really, really well. We repeated it actually in the September workshop because it worked so well. So they did their one-on-one interviews with each other. They went through the AI process of debriefing the interviews, coming up with their topics and questions. I purposely did not share with them what the staff had come up with the day before, but we did eventually share that with them, as you'll see in just a minute. But their workshop was 6 hours long, whereas the staff workshop was only 4. And the additional 2 hours that the Fellows Board had was because they made me promise that they would have time to talk about the issues, the big negative stuff. And I kept saying, we don't do that with AI. And they kept saying, but we must. And I said, you'll understand once we get into it. So I did allow them to take a break, and we allowed them to talk about it, but it was after we had already started appreciative inquiry, after we had already started engaging in what the topics were and thinking about what really makes IFMA work when they're working at their positive best. And once they did that, they could see then that, yes, their topics were actually covered within those. But you can see here that these were the topics that they had raised. So both workshops resulted in similar topics, and this was surprising actually to the fellows and board as it was to me, because the staff had really come up with very similar concerns that the fellows and had it been expressing, and chapter leaders and others. So the board was not, I wouldn't say that they were unaware of those, but I think that they didn't really understand the huge impact that some of their decisions were having on their members and the staff in different ways. So they developed these 3 topics, and I really love these because they really address a wide spectrum. Sharpening FM skills, which really focuses on the individual facility manager. Exceptional member experience, that really focuses on the staff and the association serving the members. And then broadening and advancing the FM profession, that really talks about expanding and the FM profession as a whole. So really contributing back to the profession and the career that they had chosen. So this was really encouraging to see these topics. that they were similar. So this is when we brought it out and showed the fellows group that was meeting the day after the staff, say, look at what the staff had come up with. And then we shared with them, again, after the fellows and board had developed their sample questions, drafted some questions, we said, well, let's share with you what the staff came up with. And I'm not going to go through all these, we don't have time, but I love this question that the staff developed about sharpening skills for the individual FM. Abraham Lincoln said, give me 6 hours to cut down the tree and I'll take 4 hours to sharpen my axe and 2 hours to take down the tree. Perfect metaphor, right? And then they went on to develop the rest of that question about helping them sharpen their skills. And we then, this is the final question that resulted. The staff took great pride in that their work contributed to the final question that came into the staff survey, the interview protocol that we were using for the stakeholder surveys. So here, we also show their dream question. This was, the staff developed this one too, and the fellows and board members could not believe how wonderful this was. You've been invited to address a group of 6-year-olds at a career day event. You're the 5th and final speaker behind these other professions. What would you tell these children that would get them excited to join the facility management profession? So we had a lot of fun as people were answering these questions throughout the next couple of weeks in the stakeholder interviews. So here was the original interview plan. We had 2 weeks to conduct them. We wanted all 9 stakeholder groups to be represented. The interviewers would come from 3 stakeholder groups. So, and I'll show those in just a second. We scheduled a WebEx to train the interviewers. It's just a 1-hour WebEx. I try to keep them to know how to reframe things into a more positive question if it went negative. Wasn't very successful at that, but we did our best. We also had to quickly develop a list of interviewees. We were specifically trying to pick people that we knew would make time to answer what we thought would be a 45-minute interview. Each staff member was asked to interview 1 person. There was some grumbling about that. Each board member was asked to interview 1 person, and each fellow was asked to interview 1, but we only assumed 50% of the fellows would participate. So that would get us to 120 overall, but we were going to issue about 150 invitations. But Hurricane Harvey. And Hurricane Harvey hit Houston hard. I was literally on the plane out on August 24th on my regular scheduled flight, and it hit on August 25th. And the flooding continued for the next 2 weeks. So now all of a sudden we couldn't rely on the staff to do the interviews. So we did still have 12 because there were some remote staff that agreed to conduct interviews. So we did have their help. And then the fellows had to double up, triple up, quadruple up in order to get us enough responses. And in the end, we had 80. That was not what I wanted, but it was enough. And those of us who do AI know that sometimes that's just good enough. It's okay. So we had the interview summaries prepared, and then we shared them as pre-work assignments for the people who would be attending the Discovery Dream Workshop. So we had 17 attendees to this workshop across all stakeholder groups. And as they entered the room, they could see that we were prepared to host a very dynamic day and a half. It was really a day and a quarter. They came in on mid-afternoon on one day into Chicago, and then they left mid-afternoon the next day, but we asked them to work a little bit through dinner. They did a little bit of work. I posed a question for them to ponder during dinner. So each participant read 10 summary workshops before the reports before the workshop, and each report was read by no fewer than 4 people. So you can see here that, of course, the data is leading to common themes. We asked them to think about their future vision, to come up with their positive core. When we did this, we asked them to share stories, of course, and use the interview summaries to inspire those stories, to grab some from them from there, and also to supplement with their own stories. They come up with their root causes of success, which are here on our positive core map. And then the question that I posed to them for the evening was to think about what would you What are we missing? Are there any emerging topics that we haven't thought about that didn't come out in the interviews? We want to make sure we're covering everything. And from that, they actually came up with something that they observed the following morning. So after having time to think on it, they came up with their fourth topic, and you can see that here. So this is where we had the evolution of the global FM profession and its member-centric association. That is the fourth topic, and you can see them here writing their dream narratives, and of course we ask them to then dream. And this is always the part that I sort of get a little scared of asking some corporate folks to do some dreaming. And I remember asking Ron Fry when I was in the class saying, is there ever a time that you don't do the dream? Because I can see some corporate types not wanting to do that. He said, absolutely not. You always do the dream, always must do the dream. And he was absolutely right. So we did the dream and they got so into it. So this group is doing a little song and a performance with a globe that they had. This group is doing a skit of how staff members should be treating members that call in and need help and how they can refer. This group, Broadening and Globally Advancing the FM Profession, was coming up with a new term for facility management, and they're being honored at the Oxford Dictionary annual conference that introduces new words into the dictionary. So this was that was fun, and they had, of course, those masks to do that. And then the Dream Team number 4, which was coming up with a wild and crazy idea of really changing up the profession in such a way it might not even be recognizable as facility management after that. There was a lot of passion and excitement in this room. They drafted the 4 aspirational statements. They received feedback from each other, and everyone could feel the tide turning. This was the turning point. Negativity was no longer, even though we had intentionally invited some of the most negative fellows and chapter leaders, but they all departed with not just optimism, but they volunteered to continue. They wanted to wordsmith the aspirational statements. They said, hey, let us get up at the House of Delegates and present this in October. So we got ready for that. So this is an actual shot of the conference in October, and here we are at the House of Delegates meeting. Now remember, this is the one that was really negative, and there was like an uproar and a coup the previous year, and here they are. These are the people presenting. There's me at the podium with them presenting. And there's Kate. She was presenting the 4th one, which is the real high dreaming, scheming, really pushing it out there into the future kind of aspirational statement. And then we said we've got to have other ways to promote AI during the conference. We've got 6,000 attendees here. This is a captive audience. What can we do to share AI with them and where we're going after what we've already done? We've had the first 60 days, but then what? So we had a booth on the expo floor. That was IFMA's booth, and they gave us a big, large corner of that to use to invite people in to say, talk to us. Here's the index card you see on the right. This is our aspirational statements are here posted for you to see. Which one resonates with you? What ideas do you have? What low-hanging fruit might we be able to work on and use your ideas moving forward? We had a roaming videographer that went around that asked people to a few AI questions that I had given them to ask, and we had some volunteers go with the videographer to capture all that. We have over, I think it is 14 videos from that, stories that they can then share with others. We also asked them to dialogue with anybody they met. We had this little pin that they wore on the lapels that said, I'm for AI, and it doesn't mean artificial intelligence. We presented, a bunch of us, I moderated a panel of 5 that presented at an educational session. Now the sessions were already arranged ahead of time, but we asked them to squeeze one more in so that we could acquaint more people with the AI process. Here's our booth on the expo floor with our 4 statements, taller than life. And they were double-sided statements, so you could see them from the corridor, and then once you're inside the booth, which you see here, I'm on the lower level there talking to 3 women from Nigeria and asking their opinions on what we're doing and are we serving them as international members enough. And so here's our AI process in terms of an infographic. This was a way that we could get across to people what we did in our short period of time, and this was included in handouts that we provided. So following the conference, about a couple weeks later, I opened up my email as I do every day as a member, and there's a member memo from the board chair, 3-page memo. The second and third pages were all about appreciative inquiry. So what you're seeing here is the second page. And he's talking about what a success it was and the 4 aspirational statements. And then he starts talking about steps moving forward and what he's committing to make sure that we're doing. And that last bullet that you see, report on the progress and hold an update, a session at Facility Fusion, I'm already scheduled to do that on March 22nd in Chicago. It's a smaller conference than World Workplace, but it's still a very important one. So that was a huge endorsement, which was great. Beyond, since then, in November, I had to return to that non-AI task of sharing the results of the staff survey. They were summarized and shared with the executive committee. This was a little tough because it did have quite a bit of negative language that needed to be shared, but it also was important for them to hear they needed to make some staff changes, which they are doing and in the process of doing. In December, I drafted a proposal for continuing next steps, which included rolling AI out to chapters. Meanwhile, my local chapter contacted me, and they had been to World Workplace. Some of them had participated in 1 or 2 of the workshops, and others had just heard about it and said, we want you to do AI for us. So I've given them a proposal to do that. I've drafted an agenda for the headquarters to facilitate their January 11th staff workshop just a couple of weeks ago that focused on the 4 aspirational statements. And the staff then were able to give their ideas on how they could advance the aspirational statements within their own work. So this was their time to really focus on that. They had not had much time to do that since October. The global board of IFMA is meeting this week. I think their meeting starts tomorrow in Hong Kong to review the 4 statements within their strategic framework and compare that to the staff and what they came up with. And then as a result of that January 11th staff workshop, I was invited just last week to help design an international conference this June based on the 4th futuristic statement. So not the first 3, but the 4th of the 4 aspirational statements. So in summary, I wanted to share what went well. Well, we had the right chair at the right time. He was a great leader. We also had amazing administrative support on the staff side for logistics, because if you're doing something that fast in 60 days and you've got to get hotels and catering and everything lined up, it's really helpful to have a staff member helping you with that. And we had dedicated members, even the negative ones. They might be negative, but they were passionate and they cared about their organization, and they moved personal mountains to attend the workshops and conduct interviews. We also had logistical planning and facilitation that we nailed. We nailed it every single time, and that meant that those events were successes. One of our client projects, my client projects, went on hold in July for a few months, and that enabled me to say yes to this project. I really don't know if I would have said yes, and if I had, I probably would not. I know I would not have done a proposal for a 60-day turnaround. And everyone, I mean everyone, embraced AI, even the initial skeptics. That was the most fun to watch, the people that really turned it around. So with the purpose of engaging in dialogue right now, after this, I just wanted to tell you some things I would change for next time and share some lessons learned. No surprise to anybody probably is more fee. I underestimated the number of hours, the amount of effort, but I also had a learning curve because I hadn't done AI in quite some time. And so next time, as long as it hadn't been so much of a break, I think I'll be more successful when launching this with a new client. I also think that I would have separated AI from the non-AI activities. It actually raises the hair on my back when I hear people talk about the staff survey that we did as being part of the AI effort, because I don't in my mind see it that way. But if you're not familiar with AI, and most of the client wouldn't be that familiar, they wouldn't know that conducting the survey the way we did, the one-on-one interviews and the actual anonymous survey, and having to do that summary report doesn't really fit in my opinion, but I'd like to hear your thoughts as part of an AI activity. We would have allowed more time for stakeholder interviews. I think minimally I would have said even 3 weeks, even if it just took us right up against that September workshop, because I do think we lost some people in not being able to be more flexible. It also spanned a time over Labor Day weekend. So between Hurricane Harvey and Labor Day weekend, we really didn't have a lot of time to conduct those interviews. And I also learned I need to control all communications regarding AI, especially the early ones, because I've learned after the fact, a couple weeks after the first workshop we did with the staff on August 22nd, that they thought, they were told by their CEO that they were coming to an appreciation workshop, not an appreciative inquiry workshop, an appreciation workshop. They thought they were being appreciated, that each of them were going to be appreciated in some way. So yes, they're appreciated, but as you know, the activities we planned weren't quite like that. And so their expectations, some of them were very put off by that, and I didn't learn about that until much later. So the need to control all communications, handle all of the email messages and everything that go out is really important. I would also reconsider that. What 3 things would you change? I always do, I don't know if you do, always include those in my AI interviews, because if we have a negative culture, that is something that might be where they're going to complain. Get rid of the CEO, get rid of the COO. We heard a lot of that, and that was really tough to have to reframe that. So I am interested in hearing your questions, and I'd like to hear your questions before we get some answers to mine. So at this point, I'll see if we can unmute, so if people can unmute themselves, I guess, and ask questions or put them into the chat field.
I'm monitoring the chat box, so if you guys can type your questions into the chat box so that we don't have people talking over each other, and then we can share them with Cheryl.
And in the meantime, we also have my questions. This is the first one. I'm curious as to know how many of you implement AI phases across several months rather than a 4-day summit, and what activities or workshops do you facilitate to keep the momentum and forward progress moving? Any responses?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
You might need a couple of minutes.
All right. And I'll show the second question too, which is, I'm interested in your ideas on alternative approaches to address the concerns expressed by the staff, that the non-AI portion of our work.
You're getting a lot of accolades here, Cheryl.
Oh, good. Well, that's always nice. And I know that was a whirlwind of 60 days and a couple of minutes there.
Bruce is saying, can you see the chat box?
Oh, yes, I can.
Oh,
yes. So Bruce is saying MPOD 14 student. Yay. Congratulations on that. I always appreciated real world experience too. And that's also how we learn from one another. And that's why I'm really, I wanted to share very candidly with this group. It's a very safe group to be candid with, I think, and also to hear what other people, other ideas that people might have on alternative approaches.
There's a couple here that have come through. When you type in your message, just make sure it's going to everybody and not to me privately, because I'm assuming these are not private questions. There was a question about are the results evident and what's changed since that initial workshop?
Yeah, so I am getting, it's interesting, the timing of the conference in October meant that then November was for everybody. That's when people take vacation and all that. And then it's the holidays, right? So there wasn't a lot of activity, and people were getting concerned that they were going to forget about AI. So when the chair came out with that memo, and I think that was the beginning of November, saying these are next steps and you can hold our feet to the fire on this. I just picked up a message 3 days ago from or over the weekend from a chapter president who had attended, who was very vocal and negative, who had attended our September workshop and was making sure that we are still continuing with this process. So I had to email him back and tell him the board is meeting this week and what they're doing. He had also been in touch with a board member, but I don't think it was the chair. And I also, because the staff had just met, he had actually knew about the staff, because I think the staff talk in the background to some of these chapter leaders and the fellows. And so he knew that the staff had come up with their recommendations from their workshop just 2 weeks ago. And that, I think the timing of that was really important.
Cheryl, I'll let you go look through the questions and decide.
At those questions, okay, let me look. All right. So I have, oh, I haven't seen the milestones before. How did you come up with that activity? I actually read a paper that where somebody had in a future search conference had used that idea, and I thought, oh, what a great idea. And so that became a really great icebreaker, and then also a way to unify people at the same time. So I can find that. I'll have to research where I found that paper, but that was a really good paper and helpful. That was my shortening the learning curve, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm reading everything I could read and find online, and opened up my old MPOD binders, which I still have, and looked at all old stuff just to sort of inspire myself. And then from Earl, do you feel that traditional deficit-based approaches have less than stellar success, created an opportunity for even those who were skeptical to try AI? Yes, because I kept talking about that. And oh, I meant to say this, that British Airways example about lost baggage and how they kept turning it around to, I think it was then better service recovery, and our AI practitioners said, oh no, you can't use that because that says it's okay to lose a bag as long as you recover it quickly. It's like, no. And then they turned around to exceptional arrival experience. So that one slide that's in our original AI book that we all have from Cooper Ryder and others, that one example I always use as an example of why deficit-based doesn't work. Because when you look at the difference of studying lost baggage compared to studying exceptional arrival experience, totally different ball game. And when you say that story, you can see light bulbs going off in people's heads. So I think that's my answer, Earl, to you on that. So let's see. Hello from Don. Thank you. MPOD 3 student missed out on AI. Actually, David Cooper, I was a classmate. Oh, good. This is great. Might want to publish a paper. Awesome. Would be curious to hear David or Ron's response to the first question. Probably not ideal, but in some cases the only choice, so I give you credit for moving forward. Well, thank you, because that was a tough one. Hurricane Harvey was such, yes.
So there's a question here that's come through privately.
Okay.
Is the organization more productive or profitable? How do you know?
Well, they're a nonprofit. They're an association, so I can't say they're more profitable, but are they more productive? Well, they want to be better at what they do. They want to be better at serving their members and advancing the profession. And so that's why right now we're in the middle of developing these action plans. That's the next part of the process after aspirational statements. And that's why the staff met and the board met, and now they're going to start mapping out what the action plans are so that they can then do that. So we haven't seen the full results of AI yet, because we're still in the middle. We're between that design and destiny phase, but it's definitely, we're trying to measure it as much as we can. There's a question about Hurricane Harvey was such an interrupter of your plans. What do you think you conveyed that convinced the fellows to be so engaged during that difficult time? We told them we needed them, and they are an elite group, and they have an ego. And when you say you need them and we can't do this without them, and I can't tell you how many times I've thanked them and told them we couldn't have done it without them. So we appealed to that ego, and it definitely worked. So, so a comment from Laura, thank you. And your question number 2, I wonder if asking in the survey about their suggestions for change and what they themselves would be willing to do to support change would have put this criticism in a more positive perspective. Okay, so great question, and I didn't share all the comments that we had or the questions we had in those in the questions for the survey and in our one-on-one interviews, which were the same. We did word every question as positively as we could, and we did include the what 3 things would you change to promote, to move forward. So that what 3 things would you change? We also came up a lot with the remove this person, change this. That was very negative, but needed to be said. And in fact, the results of our survey supported 360s, that they had hired a different consultant to come in and do 360s and had been doing them for a couple months. So what we were finding out actually did support what they were also hearing from others. So that was great. So we did actually try to word, because I always am appreciative of AI in my background. I'm a positive person, so I always try to word things that way. It's just that a lot of times people ignored the question and just wanted to dump on us. And every time I kept trying to reframe, they kept dumping all the negative. And it was truly a toxic work environment. So they're trying to dig themselves out of that, quite frankly. Other questions that we might have. Sarah said she used a historical timeline before and be very useful. I thought so too. The shadow will always be there from Rita. I've found that if I'm asked to do interviews with a group where negativity is expected to surface, I still use an appreciative approach with a focus of strength and overcoming challenges. That makes me feel better because that is what we try to do. So, and yeah, love it. Flexibility to the process. Not everything can be textbook perfect. Thank you. Because at times I thought I was going to lose my mind, but we have to be able to be flexible. And then the question from Allison about providing additional services for them. Yes, so I have given them a proposal. They haven't accepted all that yet, and I think that's what the board is doing this week, is to say what is strategically important to them so that they can then focus. So I'm hoping to continue more beyond the proposal I've given them to do appreciative inquiry at the chapter level. So the chapter that's asked me to do that here, my local chapter, they have volunteered to be a pilot chapter. So we're going to document the process. They're going to actually write the playbook, and then we're going to share that with the rest of the chapters that are interested. So that's huge. I mean, that's a great way to do it and to use a chapter themselves. So anything else? And how are we doing on time? We might be right up against, oh, we're over. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we're right on time. I think Earl is going to sign us off. So Earl, should I hand it over to you?
Sure. And this has been wonderful, because I know there are a lot of questions and curiosities about life applications of the MPOD materials in real life situations. And again, I can't thank you enough, Cheryl, for sharing this with us. Not only have you, given us a good example of life applications, but also no doubt that you have also encouraged many of us to see that this indeed, trust the process. It does work.
It does.
It may take time, but it definitely, positivity will trump negativity when properly delivered. And thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And is somebody able to gather some of the questions that we got in the chat box? I don't know if that's able to be saved, but it would be great if it could be.
Sure, I can figure out how to save it.
Thank you, Kylie. And thanks so much, everyone.